the X Factor podcast. I'm your host, Charles Epstein. Today I'm joined by Dr. Jennifer Miller, who is the co-founder and managing partner of Millan, a management consulting firm that partners with companies to harness the power of data for smarter, people-focused decision-making. Dr. Miller has a PhD in psychology and an MS in applied statistics from Indiana University. She has more than 15 years in conducting research in the areas of learning and communication. And Jennifer joins me today from Nashville, Tennessee. Hey, Jennifer.
Hey, Charles. How are you?
I am doing well. Nashville, as I mentioned to you in our first conversation leading up to this, is definitely on the bucket list.
Yep. You should come on down.
Well, it would be up.
Sorry.
But yes, I know you hear that New York, Long Island accent, so you can't help yourself. Nobody can.
Yeah.
I understand that. I've been down here in South Florida for 26 years, FYI.
Okay.
But yes, when I do make it up there, I am going to let you know. And I think you promised to be my personal Sherpa guide.
Of course.
I can hold you to that?
Yes. We're going to have lots of fun.
Excellent.
For folks who have been to Nashville, you have to go to Broadway. You have to see what it's like, experience it at night, listen to all the great music. It's one of the must-dos.
Oh, I don't know how I missed it all these years, but, I'm a big music fan.
Yeah.
And I know Nashville these days, I know it has a reputation, the Grand Ole Opry and country music, but it's much, much broader and much diverse musically than that, correct?
It is. It is. I know country music, that's sort of Nashville is the hub, right? Or it's one of the
Right.
hubs. I think it's the hub, but you're right. There's lots of other kinds of music that come through. We're just really fortunate to have a lot of great venues for music. So you can hear all kinds of different things. And
Yes.
yeah, it's a great city.
Yes, I will be making it up there one of these days. Again,
Sounds good.
Jennifer, thanks so much for taking the time. We're really looking forward to speaking with you about this. And our lead up conversation during it, I said, we should just hit the record button
I know.
because we spoke about so many things. So in any case, now that I have you, I'm glad we were able to do this. So, I mentioned to you, I host this other podcast called The Catalyst for Chestnut Health Systems and Lighthouse Institute. And I speak to a lot of psychologists whose work requires a lot of sophisticated numbers crunching and statistical analysis. And, from the outside, it would appear that psychology and statistics, the kind of statistics you studied, really require two distinct parts of the brain.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, what initially drew you into psychology? Were you always number oriented, or did you find that as you dug deeper into this work that it was going to require that kind of training to do the kind of work you wanted to do?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. Before you get into that, I just want to say thank you for having me on the podcast. I'm really excited to talk about the report that we're going to get to, and so I just appreciate your time and the chance to talk
Of
about
course.
this. So when I went to University of Tennessee for college, and to be honest with you, I had no idea what I wanted to do. Right, all I knew is that you go to college after high school,
Right.
and I ended up majoring in psychology. And then I realized, well, in order to actually get a job, a high-paying job, I probably need to go to grad school. And so between my junior and senior year, I ended up doing a research experience for undergraduates at Indiana University. And my job was to hand rear baby cowbirds straight from the egg. So
Okay.
I know it sounds bizarre, but
Your word, not mine, but okay.
I know. So for folks who are birders, they probably don't like the cowbirds, because cowbirds, what happens is that the females lay their eggs in another bird's nest, and then that bird raises the young to independence.
Huh.
And so what we were really interested in was, from a learning perspective, is out of all the species, the cowbird must have an innate system for song learning, social development, and we wanted to test that. And so we decided what's the best way to test it is to actually hand rear the cowbirds from the egg. And it turns out that it's really difficult to do that. And so after that experience, I went back, did my senior year, really enjoyed the summer and working with other undergraduates and also with what ended up being my advisors. And I applied to their PhD program, got in. And so I continued the work with the cowbirds. And one of the things that my advisors were really passionate about was studying behavior in the natural setting. And so we were studying bird behavior in a flock setting. These were outdoor aviaries, and we would actually go out and record and collect social interactions. And so the question really becomes, how do you actually analyze complex social interactions? You can't use the traditional statistical techniques because they're all dependent on one another. And so I think it was in my first or second year as a graduate student, um, Andrew King, who was one of my advisors, Drew King, he suggested, hey, maybe you should go take some classes on network science so that you can understand how to analyze these interactions, these patterns of interaction. And so at the time, Stanley Wasserman, he was coming to Indiana University, and he's sort of the father of social networks. He's written a book, and it was published back in '94. It's a book that everybody starts with Catherine Faust on social network analysis. And so he had just arrived to campus, and I started taking network classes in a variety of different departments: statistics, library sciences, informatics. And I became really interested in how to do and how to analyze complex social interactions using network science. And
Mm.
so after taking a couple of classes, I decided, well, maybe I'm taking so many classes in statistics, maybe I should get a master's in statistics. There was a new program where you could get a PhD at the same time as getting a master's. And so so I sort of fell into it,
Ah.
is the short answer. And it sort of evolved from what I was interested in studying at the time
Oh,
as
well,
a
say, in other
graduate
words,
student.
there's a long answer. Only kidding. Go ahead.
I know it is a very
I'm
long
only
answer.
kidding. Had to.
So it evolved over time as a necessity, in order to figure out how to analyze, bird interactions, social interactions in a flock setting. And I ended up doing my dissertation on humans. So I left the bird lab, stayed with the same advisors, but it still served me throughout my graduate career. And then when I became a faculty member, of taking statistics courses, and actually in psychology, there's a whole methodology section and great methodologists who have a lot of expertise and experience in statistics and research methods. And so depending
Oh.
on the field of psychology that you're in, especially on the research side, which is what I was in, those skills are much needed.
So what prompted you to leave academia and co-found Milan, and also want to get into your work there? And then, of
Yeah.
course, I do want to get into the study, which is a really fascinating deep dive into a lot of really timely things that, as I mentioned to you, it was so interesting reading the report. It puts numbers to a lot of the conversations I've been having on these podcasts, a lot of
Mhm.
articles I've been writing. So I'm really eager to talk about it. But again, what prompted you to leave academia and get into your current work?
Yeah, so out of grad school, I had a job at the Illinois Institute of Technology as a tenure track faculty member. And the year I started, there were a couple of other faculty members that started. Ron Landis also started at the same time. He was an endowed chair in the Department of Psychology there. And so I started off my career thinking I was just going to be in academics the entire time. I had some leadership roles, and Ron and I ended up working together on a variety of initiatives. And we started the company after I got tenure. I started the company with Ron, and we really wanted to to be a different kind of consulting firm. We wanted to be evidence-based, data informed.
So wait a second. What, you kind of yachted past tenure.
Yeah.
So you left a tenured gig.
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of people leave a tenured gig.
I know when you get tenure, you're set for life, right?
Yeah, can you ever like get back into that, or it just starts all over again?
So I think it depends, right? I think it depends on the institution that you go to. It depends if you're continuing your research career. Um, I think it really depends, but I think it would be challenging. I've never heard of anybody taking a sabbatical for a number of years and then getting back into a tenure track role or
But
something
actually,
like that.
um how often does somebody actually leave a tenured position? That's such a coveted position. I would think that
I
that is
know.
a minority, a real distinct minority of people.
Mhm.
Takes a
Yeah.
lot of work. You have to jump through a lot of hoops, a lot of anxiety, a lot of
Yeah.
publishing.
Yeah. Yeah, you definitely have to jump through a lot of hoops. There's definitely a lot of anxiety, you're right.
Yeah.
So I don't know how many people end up leaving, um, but I sort of got to tenure and I was like, "Is this it?"
Oh,
You know?
really?
Yeah, I think, at the core of what I love to do is solve complex challenges,
Right. It's
right?
like it's the end of the movie, The Candidate. What now? After all
Yeah.
this, he gets elected. What now?
Yeah, exactly. And so, I was in a variety of leadership roles. I really enjoyed those, at the department level, at the provost level, had a lot of fun. I was really passionate about undergraduate education, actually. That was really my mission is to make sure that it was, um, useful, that folks, could have a good career, earn a good living. I was really passionate about the outcomes factor and how do we prepare students so they can get jobs. And I'm still passionate about that. But after tenure, we decided to start this business. And then,
And how many years ago was that?
so this was, when did I get tenure? Ugh, I can't even remember. It must have
3,
been
5 years,
eight and a
6
half,
years,
eight and a
8
half
and a half.
years. Yeah.
Okay.
Um, and then I started the business with Ron. And around COVID, we were really busy as a business. And so we had to make a decision. And at the time, I decided to leave academia and just do the business full time. And it's been that way ever since.
So tell us a little bit about the work you do at Millan.
Yeah, so we're a consulting firm, as you mentioned, and we essentially combine psychology and statistics together to help organizations and communities make data informed decisions. And so, what that looks like, at least on the company side, we create a lot of measures, assessments of culture, engagement, and we use that to help inform the leaders on what's going right, what's going wrong, things they need to change. And ultimately, that's to help reduce turnover. That's the main goal is to make sure folks are happy at work, they have the things they need. Because if you lose, key talent, that's going to cost you a lot of money to replace them.
Sure.
And so we work on that. We also do a lot of community work too, where we go into communities and understand, collect information on, new services or things that may come into their market. And so those are some of the things that, at a community level, that we've worked on the past couple of years. And then, we have government clients as well, where we help large, in a similar space, whether it's engagement or leadership development, things of that nature. But everything is around people and around, collecting information, um, data, and making those decisions
Uh,
to impact a decision. Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent.
Yeah.
So we both alluded to the study and we want to dig into that. And it's titled The Impact of AI on the Workforce. You did it in collaboration with the Work Institute.
Hmm.
Yeah, I have some questions about some of the findings. Some of it surprising. Some of it is counterintuitive. Some of it,
Mm.
I think, reinforces some of, maybe some of our notions, some things we already thought was going on out there. But just before we get into it, just set the table a little bit, the nature of the study, how you conducted it.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's been a lot of information about AI, both, just in the news, also in just conversations with folks. We have a lot of tech firms in Nashville, startups, folks at the Entrepreneurship Center. And so I've had a lot of conversations about more on the technical side, right? What tools are we going to use? How is this adoption going to carry out the integration, whatever it may be? And so as I was listening, I was thinking, well, what about the employees? What do they think about this? And so I started asking questions about the impact that AI has on employees. Are they happier? Are they more engaged? What are their concerns? How are leaders handling this? Now they have something else to worry about on top of everything else that they're doing. How are organizations communicating about it? And I just became really curious in a bunch of questions. And so I decided, let's just write a survey. And this is something that we offer anyways as a service. Let's develop a survey and get a representative sample, right, from across the US of adults, and let's see what happens. Let's see what folks are thinking.
Yeah. Um, so we're going to get into it. Um, the report cites a support gap. And I'm going to quote here. While AI usage is high, only 79% of companies are supportive of employees using AI to complete their jobs. One in five workers are navigating AI adoption without clear company backing. It's kind of surprising. What accounts for this?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of things going on that we see. One is that sometimes employees are using AI without the company actually having a formal policy in place. It's sort of like secret, right? Um,
Yeah, we spoke about this in a Substack we did, and for years, CIOs, CTOs were grappling with what they were calling shadow IT. Now it's shadow AI. A
mhm,
lot of employees are bringing in these tools, and um, the technology leadership and leadership generally has no visibility into what tools they're using, let alone how they're using them, whether or
mhm,
not they're using them responsibly, putting inadvertently some of the company data at risk or
mhm.
exposing it. So
Yeah.
it's a problem.
Yeah, it is. And so I think when you see that one in five don't have the backing, I think what that actually means is, they don't have the strategy or the policies or the processes in place yet to actually help facilitate the use of AI in the workplace. Or maybe it's ongoing, right? And they don't necessarily know about it. Maybe it's in a committee somewhere, they're working on it. But I think you hear about a lot of folks who are using it sort of in secret, right? For a variety of reasons. Maybe their company doesn't actually want to use it. Um, Maybe the company doesn't know necessarily what processes or procedures to put in place or what the strategy should be. I think there's just a lot of uncertainty unknown at the highest level in terms of what to do because this is relatively new, right? I know some companies are further along than others, but for a company just starting off, it's where do I start? There's a lot of information out here.
Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves because the last part of the report and last question I want to ask is about leadership and some of the guidance that you provide in the report that sort of touches on some of these issues.
Mhm.
Um, the report found that AI adoption varies by company size. How does this break down, and what about company size influences adoption?
Yeah, so I think what you see is that it's really interesting. The smaller companies and the larger companies, right? Those are the two. If we look at the report, are we allowed to pull up the report?
Um,
No.
I would have to give you
No, you're fine. I see it. You're
oh,
good.
so
Yeah.
oh. Okay.
Um, in terms of the company size, what you see is that you see that the smaller companies, so the ones that have less than 50 employees, have about 75% of them have adopted AI in some fashion, and it gets up into the high 80s for the other companies. And so you have to think about for those companies that are smaller, less than 50, what kinds of resources do they have available? What kinds of personnel do they have available with the skill set to actually integrate and use AI in their company? And so I think one of the things that you see is that the companies with larger that are larger tend to have more resources to actually hire someone who's maybe a chief AI officer, or, you know, be able to hire a consultant who's charging, a certain number of dollars, right, to help them figure out what should this strategy be. And so I think part of this might be a function of resources that they have available.
Yeah, that makes sense. Although I can even see it going the other way,
Hmm.
just intuitively, because AI can be a force multiplier. So you have a
Hmm.
smaller company, the
Yeah.
more AI they use, maybe to close some of those gaps that they have not having the workforce that maybe a larger, maybe a competitor has.
Yeah, sure. And you might, so I definitely agree. You would argue like maybe the smaller companies would actually have a higher or just as high adoption rate, right? And I think the thing to remember is that, we're only talking about a 10% gap,
Hmm.
right? And so that 10%, is it going to catch up in this quarter or next quarter? Probably, right? Because this data was actually collected in December. And so I think you're going to see that there probably won't be any meaningful differences next time we collect this data.
Yeah, yeah. And again, as we discussed, I think before we even hit record, all of this is subject to change. This week, there was some news coming out of Anthropic and OpenAI. It seems like every week,
Mhm.
there's a bombshell, there's breaking news, things change
Yeah.
dramatically. So it'd be interesting uh, if I'm assuming at some point you will be perhaps revisiting this study.
Yeah, so that's the question that I've been getting from a lot of folks. So what's next on this research?
We should put a pin in that. We'll come back to that.
Yeah,
But that is a natural question to ask. So I
yeah.
do want to talk about that. But going through this report, it refers to the generational paradox.
Uh-huh.
What is that?
Yeah, so this is really interesting. One of the things in HR that we hear a lot about is, oh, there's all these generational differences. Like it's just a generational differences, and they'll pick a generation and tell me why there's a difference. It's because millennials are this way or that way, right? And so and actually, I have a podcast where I've brought on researchers who do generational research to understand, like, are there actually really generational differences? Everyone keeps talking about it. And what they have found is that, there are other ways to explain what's going on, right? Whether it's a time and point in society, whether it's something new on the horizon, and that it's not always generational differences. That could be the mechanism behind the finding. It could be some other way to explain it.
Mm,
And so I was just interested in collecting this information, and I actually didn't expect any differences whatsoever. It was going to be one of those, see, there are no differences between generations. And we actually found, I think, something really surprising. When we talk about um, looking at things like um, tool use, how the companies are adopting AI, and we see that if you look at the respondents by their generation, you see that Gen Z is significantly lower than all the other generations. I mean, we ran the test, and this is actually a significant finding here, is that you see that they're reporting less than the baby boomers, than the millennials in terms of their company adopting AI, they're using AI, and also that their support from their company in using AI. And so one of the questions that you may have is, well, why is that the case? Why is it that they're
Yeah.
working at companies that have less adoption rates than other generations? And so then when you dig into it, what you see is that these folks are more likely to work part time. They're more likely to be in the entry level roles, which makes sense, right? Because they just got out of college or they're, you know, just a few years out. So they're not at the director level, at the VP level just yet. And so I think there's a lot of things that are aligning here. It's not just the generation, right? There's other things that also can explain what's going on for this as well. And so there still are, though, if you look at these areas where Gen Z comes out reporting less than any of the others. And I think what's really striking to me is that the baby boomers are reporting AI use at a very high rate in this study.
Yeah, that is fascinating. By the way, that's a whole other conversation. It's almost a philosophical conversation. Are there differences between and among generations,
Mhm,
or is it just they're coming of age and doing certain things and it's
mhm.
intersecting with certain business trends, certain technology trends? But then the question to me is, well, can you really separate those two? I mean, a younger cohort coming of age, they're not coming of age in a vacuum. They're maturing and evolving in a particular environment, and they may be more accustomed because they grew up with certain tools, using those tools, maybe more woven into how they work and how they perceive the world and who they are. So, again, it begs the question, can you really separate generations from their environment? But that's a whole other
Yeah,
that's a whole other conversation. That's the problem I noticed when we first spoke. We can go off in so many different directions. So I'm going to try my level best to
stay in
keep
our
us
lane
focused.
today.
Yes, yes. Um, but the next question, which is also really, really interesting, um, is a section on the anxiety hiding behind the surface, how people are experiencing anxiety and what's causing it. So if you could walk us through that, because I think that if memory serves, that also sort of has a generational component. Different cohorts have different levels of anxiety around different things.
Yeah, and so that really gets into how people feel about and perceive the use of AI in the company. So, the like 2 minutes ago, we were just talking about whether their company has it, right? It's a yes, no, if, their support. And so those are very objective. This is really getting into more of the subjective. When you have AI, how do you feel? And so we ask questions like, do you feel less valued? And if you look at, again, what you're going to hear a common theme is that Gen Z has higher levels of these perceptions related to anxiety and related to feeling less valued. And they're also concerned about how AI is going to impact their job and also their long term prospects about having a job in the workforce. And this is in compare again, this is a significant finding where you see that this is different from the other generations like the millennials, the baby boomers, Gen X. And so this finding here where you see that, you know, 61% are uncertain about their future impact. That's a huge percentage
Sure.
of individuals, right? And that's only in comparison to 27% of baby boomers. There's a pretty big difference there. We did run the test, it is significant, but you can see that there's a big difference between those two. And so one of the things when I've sent this out to folks, the report, I'm really interested in hearing back from people about what do you think about the report? What do you find interesting? And it always comes back to these generational differences around the anxiety and long term prospects. And so I've had folks ask me, like, what do you think this is? Why do you think this is the case? And so some of the conversations I've been having, initially I thought, well, they're just coming out of college or they're coming out of high school. And, we hear a lot about how the entry level jobs are going to be eliminated. I didn't ask about that in the survey, but that's some of the stuff that you're hearing in on the internet, right? Or in the news. How AI is going to make things more efficient, going to eliminate the entry level jobs. And so part of it could be, hey, I'm concerned that these jobs that, are traditionally reserved for folks who are just coming into the workforce, that these are now going to go away. Um, it could be that they just have a pretty good understanding about technology and have been using technology their entire life and realize, hey, AI is going to be a huge disruptor, right? And this is going to, am I, are the things I've learned in school, how am I going to have to change that? Am I going to have to change that? What is that going to look like for me in the workplace or in the workforce, really? What jobs can I go after?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I was talking to a young gal. She is the daughter of a friend of mine. She's in 10th grade.
Uh-huh.
And I asked what she's studying. What does she want to do? I know 10th grade is kind of early, but she still had a good idea. She's obviously artistically inclined. She said, I want to be a graphics designer, do logos. And I
Uh-huh.
asked her if she uses any of the AI tools. And she immediately said, no, no. I like to rely on my own creativity. And she was citing some of the shortcomings. She clearly doesn't know enough about the AI tools to really
Mhm.
speak with any degree of experience about those shortcomings. And I was trying to be polite and I didn't
Uh-huh.
want to scare her. And I usually hesitate to offer unsolicited advice, particularly to younger people. Having said that, I tried to gently offer her some advice. And I said, well, I understand that. Good for you. But I think it behooves you to at least get familiar with some of these tools to understand their power, their limitations, so you can
Mhm.
tailor your skills around them and figure out what value you can add because they're only going to get, more powerful. And as far as baby boomers go, I've said about myself, thank God, at this end of my career rather than that end of my career, because I see in my work the threat that it can pose.
Uh-huh.
So I'm curious as far as baby boomers go. Um, if memory serves, they're less anxious
Oh, yeah.
about the
Mhm.
threat to their jobs, their livelihood, their
Mhm.
careers than younger generations. Is that because they are experienced, they're secure in what they bring to the organization? Is it possibly also because they just don't know? They're not
Mhm.
gravitating to those tools. They're not using those tools. And I guess ignorance is bliss in a sense.
Yeah. I mean, we know that they're using the tools, right? But to your point, they are at the end of their career, or getting to the end of their career. And they're also at usually in higher level roles, director, VP, C suite. Um, and so they may have more information about where this is going within a company than the Gen Z, right? It could be a function of communication too, that when you don't communicate about something that's going on, it's hard to, you just become more anxious about whatever it is that's in front of you. And so it could also be lack of information for Gen Z, whereas the baby boomers have more information. Um, and may feel like, okay, if I'm in the C level, I'm less likely to get replaced right
Mm,
now, right? Because everything that they're discussing might be more at the entry level. But I think there's a number of things going on in that realm.
yeah. Although you could also argue that there's some mid-level people with some of these tools that can do what people senior to them
Mhm.
can do. And in a weird way, it goes into my next question. But yeah, that's a whole other conversation. Um, the next thing that study found is that while AI is making things better at the employee level, it's not bringing teams together.
Mhm.
While 87% of people say AI boosts the productivity of their own job, fewer than half believe it's improving how their teams work together. Um, I have some thoughts on that, but I'd like to know what the data showed and what your take on that is.
My take on it? Yeah. So we did see that at the individual level, this has pretty good gains when you ask people about, how does it help you in your job in terms of making decisions, in terms of productivity. And by and large, folks were pretty positive about that. Where we start to see differences in the data is when you get to the team level. So has AI helped you in working with your team or with other teams? And that's where it starts to fall apart. And so for me, I think that's an interesting point, right? We're all working in teams. What's going on there, right? You would think that if it's productive at the individual level, then it should maybe transition to the team level. And I think what's going on is that we just haven't gotten to that point as to how are we going to have AI help at the team level, and that it's been really focused more so on the individual level. And so I wonder, maybe the team stuff just hasn't gotten to the team level yet. It's just been at the individual level, and that, you know, in this year, next year, we'll start to see how AI can really help teams work better together, and that those numbers will start to increase. And so it could also be a function of the strategy that's going on with AI, is that, it just hasn't entered, we haven't gotten to that part of the strategy yet for a
Hmm.
company.
My thought is this, in part because I've actually seen this dynamic at work.
Mhm,
Where you'll have a team and you'll have members of that team. Thanks to AI, now they have skills that they didn't have before. Overnight, they have skills. So, just as a for instance, I don't design logos. All of a sudden, you can design a logo. And somebody who's on that team, whose job it is to design logos, now feels a little bit of a threat.
mhm,
Um, Maybe you're looking to develop a marketing or business plan. All of a sudden, with one of these tools, you could, whereas before you didn't have skills overnight, you have skills that encroach on the person who's part of that team for that very specific purpose.
mhm.
So I can see if I've seen that dynamic. I don't know if it's anecdotal, or if that's been experienced by, a lot of people, but I can see that, having some negative impacts on team cohesion, if you will. Of
Yeah, so I do think, one of the things, and a survey can't answer all the questions, but what I've
course.
been interested in understanding is how are folks using AI? So if they think about it with respect to their responsibilities for their job, right? What percentage are they using AI to help with those? And then looking outside of their job. So there you had a couple of examples where, maybe they're not in graphic design, but now all of a sudden they can actually create something, right? When that wasn't necessarily part of their job description.
Right.
And so I think it's really interesting to think about, how does work get redefined because of AI? And what does that look like when things that maybe would have taken 2 to 4 weeks, now it's overnight?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's early days for sure. So we mentioned at the end of the report, you discuss leadership opportunities for leaders or leadership. Um, so, what can or should leaders do to lead their organizations in the age of AI? What guidance does this report provide on that?
Yeah, so I think one of the things, and some of this isn't new, like when you talk about change management or when you talk about anything that's coming into a company, um, you see a lot of similar things happen here, where making sure leaders are communicating about the changes. I think especially in AI, creating a culture of trying out new things, and that failure is going to happen, and being okay with that failure and being able to experiment and figure out what's working, what's not working, and having a culture where you come together to ask, like, hey, what's working here? What are things that we can, send up the chain or send to another team or as an example? And what are things that just didn't work? What do we learn about those? And so I think it's really important to have a culture where communication is valued. You're being transparent about what's going on. I think part of the reason why you see high levels of anxiety from some folks is that they just don't know and there's not enough communication about the changes that are being made or what would happen if, you know, roles get eliminated. I think there's a lot of anxiety around that. Um, and so I think making sure that, um, it's very similar to a lot of the change management, making sure there's trust there, um, and that the leader, they're obviously not going to know all the AI skills that they need to know in order to do more of the technical stuff. But I think leading through change is really critical uh,
Yeah.
in this area.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point. I mean, people talk about the increased need to develop, acquire so-called soft skills.
Hmm.
These aren't new. These are the same core skills. We're not inventing new skills. We're just sort of recontextualizing them.
Yeah.
You'll still need to lead. You still need to understand how to collaborate. Maybe you want to be a more empathetic leader, something like this. So these are not new skills, but they need to
Mm-mm.
be rethought.
Yeah. And I think now, there's some folks are thinking that, hey, bots are going to be part of the team, right? So there are some new considerations in terms of who's managing a bot or, what happens when the bot makes a bad decision, who's
Right.
ultimately responsible for that,
Bad bot.
right? So I think there's some things to work out that are specific to AI, but in terms of the overall, when things change or disrupt a company, what are sort of the key things we need to keep in mind? And communication is always going to be at the top of that.
Yes, for
And
sure.
so I think, like you said, some of these soft skills that we know are critical and important um, when having a team, leading a team, it's the same skill set here when we're talking about AI.
Yeah. Yeah. Thinking of that eurythmic song about a new emotion. I forget how that lyric goes, but I don't think that applies here. Um, so I asked you what the thinking is as far as revisiting this a little bit down the road. And you said other people have asked you about that.
Hmm. Yeah. So it's a popular question. It's one that's been coming up a lot. I think so this is a moment in time, and as we already indicated, this is changing so quickly,
Mm.
like week to week, day to day, and so I think it's important to keep track of this and see how this changes over time. And so one of the things I was thinking about is, hey, maybe every quarter we sort of get a sense of what's going on with respect to these areas. Because, the way the survey was really constructed was to understand what's going on at the individual level, at the team level, with the supervisor slash manager, and at the organizational level.
Mhm.
And those are typically how we think about constructing organizational surveys. And so, um, taking this, maybe I've had a lot of suggestions of, hey, wouldn't it be so cool if we knew X, Y, and Z, right? So we could make this like 5 times longer, of course. But thinking through what are the things that we really need to keep track of over time and want to get a sense as to how things change or if they stay the same. And so I think on a quarterly basis, you could think 4 times a year. I don't know, maybe that's not enough. Maybe we need to do it more frequently.
Right.
Um, and
Yeah.
so that's what I've been sort of thinking through.
Yeah. That makes
Um,
a lot of sense. I already got your commitment to take me around Nashville. So if I apologize if I'm overreaching, but can I get your commitment to come on quarterly when you have that report?
right.
Because I'd love to talk with you about that.
Yeah. So if we do the report, for sure,
Yes.
I'm coming
Okay,
on.
good. Okay. Excellent.
You're just gonna be my marketing arm now for this.
Happy to.
Yeah,
Happy to.
this is all you
Now,
know.
really, Jennifer, kidding aside, really quality work.
Thank you.
And it's linked in this description. I strongly urge anybody listening to this, click on it, check it out. It's terrific stuff. Jennifer, thanks so much. I appreciate it. And I am going to have you on again.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And for folks that are looking at the report, please email me your questions, comments, insights. I love to hear from folks. I think that's been one of the best things this week. It just launched and I'm getting all kinds of emails and calls about it. And so I really love to hear from folks. I mean, this is sort of the mind of a researcher. Let's figure this thing out together, right?
Yes. Yes. Great. Thanks, Jennifer.
Thanks.